All your instruments are on stage. They're tuned up. You're ready to go. So how do you begin your show? Well, typically, the beginning begins with a sound check. You know, the process where the engineer comes up and asks each of the musicians on stage to play a little bit while he tweaks around with the knobs on his mixing console. And then after he's done with all the instruments, he probably asks the band to check their vocal mics, check their monitors, and then he'll probably ask the whole band to play for a minute together so he can get the mix dialed up so you're ready to play your show. And so when your show starts off, the band sounds nice and balanced, and you can begin a good show. Well, my name is Barry, and I'm a sound engineer in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Twin Cities area. I've done something well over 1,000 shows. And one of the compliments that I often receive from bands is, "Oh my gosh, wow, that was the fastest sound check ever." Because I don't really like to do the sound check. Now, I think there are some engineers who enjoy the sound check process. I don't know, maybe because they get to play conductor or they like to be in charge for a minute. But me, personally, I don't like doing sound checks because it's kind of like guitar players on stage playing before the show, just noodling away on their instruments. In my opinion, generally, overall, I don't think that anybody in the venue wants to hear that shit. And the same thing with a sound check. Your band doesn't sound very good during the sound check, and so I don't want to make the audience endure a poor sounding band and give them an initial impression of your band that's less than great. I want you to step up on stage, start your show, be in balance, sounding great right from the get-go, and I want that to be the initial impression that your audience receives. So how do I do it? Well, let me give you a little secret. Now, this is a secret, so you can't tell anybody, okay? I don't need to do a sound check. But I do a sound check with almost all of my initial new bands. After I've worked with a band 3 times, I almost never do a sound check. But, the first couple times I go through the process, and the reason I go through the process, and like I tell you, this is a secret. It's a little secret, okay? It's a psychological exercise for the band. Because, you see, I'm familiar with the whole typical band process, and bands expect to do a sound check. And so I give it to them. And the only reason I give it to them is so that the band members will feel comfortable with me as an engineer, that I've got everything checked out and taken care of. But the truth is, I've already done it before they stepped on stage. So I don't need to do it. Now, that's not 100% entirely true. I have had a couple of instances where I was actually glad where I did a sound check. I had an instance once where I asked the band to just play me half a song and just make sure that they're okay. And I start shoving up the master thrusters, start bringing them up to concert level. And as I started getting up near the top, oh my goodness, I started getting feedback through the mains. That was not cool. And so I immediately took care of that issue, and I was glad that we did the sound check so I could discover that things were a little unstable at high level. And that was in a room that was particularly reflective, and I just didn't quite get that room dialed out. But I didn't have the opportunity to really push up to full concert level until that time, and so I was glad that we did the sound check at that time. And I think there's probably been an episode or two in my long fuzzy memory where we've done the sound check and the band has asked for some monitor adjustments. But generally, overall, I don't need to do a sound check. And I don't like to make the audience endure the pain of doing a sound check. I see some engineers out there going through this sequence, going, okay, kick drum, please. Boom, 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 boom. Snare drum, boom, boom, boom. And he goes through all the different instruments, and he takes an inordinate amount of time tweaking around with all these levels. And the whole process takes 10, 20 or more minutes. And I sit here just rolling my eyes going, what the hell are you doing, bro? Because the fact is, in my experience, that most of the time, the way that the band plays during sound check is really not the way the band's going to play when they do live performance. So I could sit here and I could get all these guys just dialed in, dead nuts on during the sound check. And it all goes just right out the window as soon as the band starts playing live, and I got to readjust it anyway. So what's the point? Why should I spend just an inordinate amount of time tweaking up all of the settings for a performance that isn't going to be the performance and make the audience endure a bad sounding band for 10 minutes. I mean, that's really not a way to start your show off right, if you ask me. So let's talk a little bit about my method of doing a sound check, which I know is a little contrarian. And if this is not the way you do things, that's fine. I mean, we all have our own way of doing things. And if what you're doing works for you, that's fantastic. But my method works for me, and I've arrived at this after doing a lot of live shows with a lot of different bands. And generally, it's really appreciated by the band. So the basic process that I go through is before the band even arrives at the venue, I get a stage plot. So I know where all of the instruments are going to be on stage. And then to my best of my ability, I will run cables to each of those locations where the bass amp is going to be, and the guitar amps and the drums and keyboards and whatnot, and all the vocal mics. And so I get the stage set up as much as I possibly can before the musicians arrive. Then, of course, they arrive and I drop the mics into position and so forth. And then, before the band is even finished with that stuff, I've gone through my mixer and I set each of the channels to the settings that I anticipate for that kind of instrument. And this is just a little bit of a matter of experience, I suppose, but I have found that generally speaking, the levels I need for a guitar amp are pretty consistent. The levels I need for keyboards or drums, vocal mics are pretty consistent from one musician to the next to the next. And so just through experience, I know approximately how much gain those preamp channels are going to require for all those different instrument types. I know from experience the kind of equalization that I want for a bass guitar, for a kick drum, for vocal mics, and so forth and so on. And so I preset my whole mixing board up to what I would consider to be a pretty typical mix for that kind of band. Now, if I've worked with that band previously and I've got those settings saved in a file for my digital mixer, well, I'll just pull that file up from my settings from last time, and well, that should be pretty close too. And then, after I've done that, I will go through and I will set a typical band mix with the faders level-wise. And I'll do a little bit of push one way or another, which is I'll set the vocals to be just a little bit higher than I anticipate, maybe 2 dB, 3 dB. I'll set the guitars to be just a little bit lower than I anticipate. I'll make sure I have plenty of kick drum and plenty of snare, because that's the driving force of the band. As for the toms and metal on the drum kit, I'll back them down a ways, because that can be overwhelming if I go too much. But if I go too little, the audience isn't going to notice that much, and so forth. Then I'll get up on stage, and I will make sure that all of the stage wedge monitors, assuming we're using wedges, not in-ears, are set up so that the vocalists have plenty of stage foldback on their vocals so that they have good monitoring. And 9 times out of 10, when the band steps up on stage, I ask them to do a quick mic check, and they just go check, check, check into the mic, and they can hear themselves come back to the monitors. And most of the time the guys say, oh, yeah, that's great, perfect, no problem. Then I'll ask them to ask which vocals they want in each of their monitors and adjust that real quickly. And you'll notice that in my sound check process, I do the vocals first, because that kind of sets the baseline for the stage volume. Because after I've done the vocals, we got the monitors all working, and for that we don't need to play a song. I just need the guys to do a quick little mic check. Then if the guitars are too loud or some instrument is too loud and they can't hear the vocal monitors, well, the solution is pretty obvious to adjust the instrument as opposed to trying to push monitor levels up, and try to overcome the stage volume. So that's a good little psych trick that tends to help control your stage volume. And then what I'll do is, if I've worked with the band before, we're done. And when they start playing, it only takes me 10 or 15 seconds at most into the first song to get the final tweaks on the levels to really get them dialed in and in the pocket. And so within the first 15 seconds or so of playing the song, I shove up the levels and the instruments to match the vocals where they are. And then I go back and I start dialing up things like reverb and delay and so forth in the vocals to make the vocals sound nice and thick. And within just moments into that first song, I've got the band dialed up and sounding great. And even so, generally speaking, from the first note they play, they're pretty much in the pocket. And so you don't really need to do an extensive sound check if you have worked with a few bands and you know approximately what those settings on the board are going to be, and you just get everything preset for the band before they even step on stage. Now, of course, if it's a new band and I want to do a sound check just to make those guys feel comfortable, because they've never worked with me, they've never worked with me before, and they don't know, my process. And so for their comfort level, I go through a sound check dance with them, and all I do is I just ask them to play half a song, and they do a few bars of it. I want to wait until they do some singing to make sure that they got monitors okay, and then I'll wave them off and say, that's great, no problem. Do a little circle around the band asking everybody how things feel, and we are usually ready to rock within less than 30 seconds. So I don't need to do a big, long, laborious sound check, unless there's some problem, at which we'll make an adjustment and we'll try playing a song again. But I never want the band to play more than up into the chorus. That's all that's necessary. And I don't want to make the audience endure a bunch of poor-sounding band nonsense, because that just detracts from the opening of your show. Anyway, guys, that's a quick tip for you. I hope that it helps, and I encourage you to do as much work as possible to get set up for the show before the band even arrives. That way you waste less of their time, and it makes for a better band opener, and from my experience, the bands really appreciate it. So there you go, and there's the tip. Once again, my name is Barry. I'm a sound engineer in the Minneapolis, Twin Cities area. If you're in the area and you'd like some advice, I'd be happy to do what I can for you. You can find my website at www.soundguy.rocks. And I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you stick around and enjoy future videos coming up. And if you would hit the subscribe button, I'd appreciate it. Hit the bell so that you're notified. And if you want to show your undying love and appreciation, you can always give me a thumbs up. Or you can give me a thumbs down if you disagree. It's your life. So, it's been good talking to you, and I look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Sound Advice.